Okay, very good afternoon, everyone. I hope that all of you are well, and at the same time, you're keeping yourself safe amidst COVID-19, amidst all this flooding and the cyclones coming in and going out. First of all, my apologies. I wasn't able to upload the lecture recording on time. It's just that Nandi has been suffering from a lot of power outages since Saturday, and half of Nandi, probably I would say about three-quarter of Nandi is still without electricity, including FNU Namaka campus as well. So I managed to get my laptop and my devices charged up. I'm still sitting in the dark, but let's carry on with the things and try to get things sorted. By the way, my name is Munil Gounder, and I work as a lecturer in the Department of Computer Science and Information Systems, currently based in Namaka campus. Now, what I gather from Ms. Anupriya Narayan is that we are left with an introduction to AJAX. That's the only set of syllabus that we are left with CIN628 Summer class. So we have today, we have tomorrow, Thursday, and then we have Friday. So in total, we have 3 classes. So in today's class, we'll begin off with AJAX and we'll finish it off. Okay, it's not a lengthy content, it's very simple. And I'll try to hit the hammer on the head of the nail, try to be as simple as possible so that it makes it easy for you to grasp things. Moreover, please do note that AJAX is not tested in your final exam because AJAX is more like a supplementary component in CIN628, whereby you will learn the very basic introduction and there's nothing more to it. There's no programming, there's no practical coding or programming aspects to AJAX, okay? And with Thursdays and Fridays class, what I will do is I will gather up and sum up the entire course for you. Moreover, I will provide you with a set of revision questions. Now, the revision questions, what you will have to do is, I'll give you the questions, and then you'll have to go and answer the questions yourself. Why yourself? So that once you actually start digging the answers, it will build up knowledge, okay? And at the same time, it will act as a revision for you, and it will require little preparation for your final examinations. Okay, so without further delay, let's quickly go and start off with the lectures. Now, I'll be switching off the video, so that we'll have a better efficient network. Okay, so I'll quickly share the lecture notes. So we are on AJAX. Now, introduction to AJAX. This is what we'll be covering up. It's just an introduction. Like I told you earlier, we won't be digging into the coding aspects of AJAX. And with AJAX, okay, it's quite interesting actually. Once you're well versed with AJAX, you should be able to do a lot of interesting things in web development. Now, you do not need to be a PHP or a Java or a XML expert to actually perform AJAX-based functions. Even if you will start learning the very basics coding part, if you start learning the very basics of it, and then you can build on later onwards. So you need no prior knowledge of any other programming language when you start off with AJAX. What is AJAX? Now, AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Now, I think you might be familiar with JavaScript, and at the same time, you should also be familiar with XML. Okay. When I say familiar with, even if you do not know how to code this, you must have heard the name somewhere. Okay. With JavaScript is a combination of object-oriented coding Java and scripts, and XML is a extension to hypertext markup language, HTML. So XML, extensible markup language. So this is what the acronym AJAX stands for. Now, what AJAX does, it transforms traditional web applications into responsive web applications. Now, if you try to differentiate between a traditional web application and a responsive web application, the simple way is drawing a comparison between static and dynamic websites. Now, static websites, generally these are websites that are used to disseminate information. If I would have to give an example, let's think of fijivillage.com. Now, fijivillage.com, what you are most able to do with that particular website is that you can read things from the website, but you are not able to manipulate things on the screen. On the other hand, when you look at responsive web applications, a very good example is, let's say, our social media site, Facebook. Okay. Now on Facebook, not only you can read things, but you can also manipulate objects on the screen. For instance, you can put up your status. You can upload images. You can download images. Moreover, you can use the chat feature and so forth. So that's the difference between traditional and responsive web applications. Now, do note that AJAX is not a programming language. Okay, when we say okay, a particular thing is a programming language, for example, we say C# is a programming language. Now, C# has a different set of syntax of its own. It has a different sets of document object model. It has a different set of language of its own. Okay, whereas AJAX does not have that. Now, what AJAX does, it uses a combination of different programming languages to perform certain functions. That's what is written in the fourth point. Uses a combination of browser built-in XML, HTTP request object, JavaScript, and HTML DOM, document object model. Now, HTML DOM, I think you have coded HTML in this particular course. Now, when you start coding with HTML, so you have a HTML skeleton. So with the HTML skeleton, you have opening HTML tags, and then you have head tags, and then after that, you have opening and closing body tags. So that is the DOM for HTML, document object model. By the way, if you would want to define DOM, document object model, it is basically a data representation of the objects that comprise the structure and content of a document on the web. Okay, so that's HTML DOM. Now, AJAX, basically, it uses a browser. So with the browser, it uses HTML, it uses JavaScript, it may use CSS, it may use MySQL, it may also use PHP or jQuery to a certain extent to perform certain types of functionalities. Usefulness of AJAX in web development. So why is AJAX important in web development? First of all, it automates tasks. Refresh of web pages is not required. Now, what happens is that AJAX allows you to insert data in a website from a database or a server without having to refresh the database each and every time. Okay, so that's where automation of tasks kick in. So you don't need to go and press on to the refresh button on your browser to have new data popping into your website, or for you to actually extract data from the database or the web server and have it displayed on the website. So AJAX does that for you. Moreover, okay, AJAX allows data to be inserted in a website from a database or a server much easily. Now, why would it be easily? Now, it can be done very, very easily in terms of you can have a button on a website. When you click on it, it displays certain information. Now, AJAX can allow you to do that. Now, you might say even PHP may allow you to do that. Yes, it may, okay, and it will. But what happens is this. With PHP, you might need to go and refresh the page, or you might need to go and perform a sequence of functions. Whereas with AJAX, it can be automated in the programming itself or in the coding itself. Now, AJAX is a lifesaver for many developers and web applications. Now, why it is a lifesaver? Okay. Now, what happens is that when you automate tasks on a web page, okay, a lot of manual functionalities are basically omitted. And with that, okay, many developers and many web applications are much more many developers find web applications much more easier to develop and much more intuitive to get it built in. As a user, you'll also find the website to be very user friendly. Okay, now when does a website become a good website? when we say there's a lot of usability in it. When you talk about usability, you're talking about how easy it is for a human to interact with the computer system. So AJAX is one of those that makes it way more usable, way more easy, therefore a lifesaver for many developers and web applications. Now, just a short exercise, okay? Now, in this exercise, you will have to answer 4 specific questions. Now, if we were actually conducting a face-to-face class, I would have asked this in class and we would have had a good conversation and discussion on this. But over here, what I will do is, since I'm just recording the lectures, what I will do is I will read the question and I will answer it straight away, okay? So, exercise, first question, list and describe a commonly used web application where AJAX may be used. Question number 2, would there be any alternative if AJAX was not used? If yes, what is the alternative? 4, what is easier, with AJAX or without AJAX? So to answer question number 1, list and describe a commonly used web application where AJAX may be used. Now, from what we have learned earlier in the previous 2 slides, okay, we say one of the common things we have talked about is this, okay, automate tasks. Refreshing of web pages is not required, okay? Now, if we try to think very, very carefully, let's think of a place whereby a website is responsive, okay? Now, we've talked that AJAX transforms traditional web applications into responsive web applications. So a website needs to be responsive first, okay? So let's think of a website which is responsive, and at the same time, think where refreshing of pages may not be required. Now, one of the common things I could think of at this very moment, in fact, there are a lot of things I could think of, but one of the easiest ones and the most of which all of you must have used is Facebook. Okay, now in Facebook, we have a chat feature. Okay, now in the chat feature, let's say this person A and person B. So person A and B, they're conversing with one another through the chat component in the web application. And then person A writes something to person B. Now imagine this. What if instead of the message popping in every now and then, let's say person A writes to person B, so the message doesn't go to person B instantly. You'll have to refresh the page every now and then. What happens? It makes it very monotonous. It makes a very tedious task. And I'm sure a lot of you would not be using Messenger then, okay? Or chat feature on Facebook. So one example where it could be used is Facebook, the chat feature. Okay, this is where AJAX is used. So what happens here in this case is that when somebody is messaging you, you are instantly able to read and see the message. Now, this is the work of AJAX, that it loads data without you refreshing the entire browser. 2, would there be any alternative if AJAX was not used? Yes, there is an alternative, a very simple alternative. Refresh the page every now and then. So after a few seconds, refresh, and then refresh, and then refresh. Now, if you would try to go back, let's say about 10 to 15 years back, there was something called as Yahoo Messenger. It was very common back then, okay? Now, the first few versions, the trial versions of Yahoo Messenger that actually came in, you'd have to press onto the refresh button. So if I would try to send a message to someone, let's say to person B, so what happens in that case is that as soon as I would send a message to person B, so I'll wait for a few seconds and then press on the refresh button. And then it will try to refresh the entire web page and see if there is any new message. Okay, would be odd if you try to use it on Facebook these days. So 2 and 3, would there be any alternative if AJAX was not used? Yes, there will be. If yes, what is the alternative? You have to refresh the entire web page every few seconds. 4, what is easier, with AJAX or without AJAX? Now you do the conclusion. Do you want to refresh your web page every now and then, or do you want to get the message seen instantly? So in this case, using the web page with AJAX is way more easier. Okay, I hope this is very simple for you to understand of what we have done so far. Now, I've used few things, and I would suggest if you're trying to answer this question on your own as well. Okay, so look at this. Transforms traditional web applications into responsive web applications. So try to search for responsive web application, 1. 2, refresh of pages. Using that, you can come up with an example. There are many. For example, you have Instagram. You can DM, direct message on Instagram, and when somebody sends you a message, you can nowadays, you can even see who is even typing, whether the other person is typing or not. Okay, now that is all the work of AJAX. Let's continue. Now, how AJAX works. Now, we have said so far, AJAX is not a programming language. Okay, what it does, it incorporates itself with other types of programming languages. Now, first of all, how it works, it loads data from a web server or a database. Now, the data needs to be stored somewhere. Okay, when you're dealing with web applications, and especially if you're working with a responsive web or dynamic web, you have data interaction between the client and the server, whereby the client requests for the information and the server responds. So in this case, the data that is displayed on your web page comes from either a web server or a database. Loading process can be taken care by PHP. Now, what it means over here is you're using AJAX with combination of other programming languages. But the process in which data is retrieved from the database and then displayed on your web page is actually carried out by PHP. What AJAX does, it allows a function to be inserted in between the web server and database using PHP. AJAX can be used to display data immediately. Very true, and we have talked about it. Chat messages, remember? Only certain part of the website is refreshed. Now, please do focus on point number 4. When you are chatting with someone, does the entire web page gets refreshed or just the chat component? It's just the chat component. Okay, with a traditional website, if you're trying to refresh something, you have to refresh the entire website. In this case, only certain part, in the example that we're using with Facebook, your chat box or your chat message feature is only refreshed. And the refresh command can be managed automatically using AJAX. Okay, so you don't need to press a refresh button. Remember, with Messenger or the Facebook chat feature, remember Messenger is different from Facebook chat feature. Messenger is a different application of its own. The chat feature is basically incorporated with Facebook's website. Okay, so the refresh portion, it is managed automatically. Now, how do you think it manages the refresh? How does it know that somebody's messaged? Now, there are programming languages that can be used and that can tell you whether someone has messaged or not. One, or another thing, what you could do is, if you are a beginner in AJAX and if you want to ensure messages pop in every now and then, you can set up a automatic refresh within 2 or 3 seconds. So within 2 or 3 seconds, it will try to refresh itself and just a component of that particular website. Or it could be triggered with a command, example, a button. You can even use a button, and then when you click on that button, it can refresh a page or it can pull data from a website. Okay, now buttons are generally, I have seen the use of AJAX in a lot of different websites, and is generally used for pulling data from the database. For instance, you must have seen somewhere, okay, you have a set of comments on a web page, and then you have a button, it says click for latest comments. When you click on it, it displays the comments and takes you right at the very latest comment. So that's the work of AJAX as well, and that is incorporated with the use of a button. All right, to sum this up, now AJAX basically loads data from a web server or database. Loading process is generally taken care of by PHP. Now AJAX, what it does, it refreshes data, and data can be displayed immediately or almost immediately. And how does it do it? It does it by refreshing certain part of a website. Moreover, the refreshing of the certain part of a website can be managed automatically, or it can be managed by a button. Now, moreover, just to sum up this slide, right at the very bottom with the button portion, generally when you have a button, this is the place where you're trying to pull out something from the database or the web server. How AJAX works continues. Okay, AJAX is used with PHP and databases. Now, databases, when you talk about databases, you are talking about a programming language. So in this case, you're using MySQL. Okay, MySQL and PHP, these are the common two languages that are used to allow transmission of data to and from a website to a server. Now, AJAX is embedded and incorporated in a HTML page. So just like you have a normal web page with HTML opening and closing tags, you can insert in a script and then you can code AJAX. You do not need to be an expert in database languages, MySQL or PHP. I think I've mentioned this earlier at the very beginning. You do not need to be an expert in any of the programming languages. You could simply go and learn this from the scratch, and that too very, very easily. AJAX displays and pulls data from within the database without refreshing the entire page. So this is a very important key feature. When AJAX, it automatically refreshes, and it does not only refresh the entire page, it only goes and refreshes a certain portion of the page. Types of AJAX. There are two types of AJAX, and the first one is AJAX with JavaScript. JS stands for JavaScript. This is where you are coding AJAX with Java coding and scripting languages. Okay, JavaScript, by the way, it is a separate language from Java. What it does is Java scripting handles the back-end command of a database or of a web server or a web page in this case. Now, AJAX with jQuery. So you have Java, remember we have JAX with JavaScript, and then AJAX with JavaScript rather, and AJAX with jQuery. Now jQuery, it is much more easier to learn and practice. Why? Because the syntaxes in jQuery is way more simple, whereas in JavaScript, it tends to make things a bit more complicated and difficult. So this is based on my assumption, okay? Different people may find it otherwise. For example, if you are already an expert in Java and JavaScripting, you may find this easier. Why? Because you already have knowledge in Java. But let's say if you are a newbie and a fresh person in programming, I would suggest for you to go and use AJAX with jQuery. Now, challenges. There are certain challenges when you're working with AJAX. There is programming complexity. When you are working with AJAX, or when you try to write AJAX, you need to write down or write with a Java or a jQuery language. Moreover, you have to create an AJAX object. Once you've done that, you need to write down the function and the expression in either JavaScript or jQuery. And then you need to handle the data. So these are the four main steps when you are dealing with AJAX. Let me repeat them. First of all, you need to write down a program in Java or jQuery. 1. 2, you need to create an AJAX object. 3, you need to write down the function or expression in JavaScript or jQuery. 4, you need to handle the data. So what happens, it makes work very, very complex. For example, if you are just writing down a object-oriented programming using Java only, all you're doing is you're just writing down a plain simple Java program. However, since AJAX is not a programming language, you're trying to incorporate it with different programming languages. So you'll have a web page. A web page will definitely have HTML and CSS. In it, you're using Java or jQuery, and then you need to create an object. And within the object, you need to go and write down a function or an expression. And then from there, you need to write a different set of code to handle the data. So that makes it very, very complex. And this is one of the major challenges when you are working with AJAX. Second challenge is poor workability in network concerns. Why poor workability? Now, this is not the programming part. This is in terms of a user point of view. Now, poor workability in network concerns in terms of if your network or if your internet connectivity is not up to the standard, if it's not so efficient, it will not display things very, very properly. For instance, I don't know if you've ever faced this or not. Sometimes, let's say you're sending a message on Viber or on Messenger even, okay? Now, the message that you sent last, they may go and settle right above somewhere you had started off. For example, you have written line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. So line 4 goes and jumps in between line 1 and 2. It's not in order. So that's where the poor workability network concerns come in. And this is where AJAX is more affected. Why? Because it may miss on to the refreshing sequence. Especially when you've assigned, let's say, within every 1 or 2 seconds, your certain portion of the web page needs to be refreshed. Just when there is poor network connectivity, so the sequence is broken and your message may not settle in a sequential order. Third point, user experience. If you are a novice user, let's say in a very demanding web page like Facebook, now Facebook is a very demanding web page, and also the more you use it over time, you build on knowledge as to how to go around using those features very, very efficiently. So if you're a novice user, you'll face issues, especially with AJAX. You'll face issues in terms of understandability. And with that, if you have network concerns, there would be issues. And if there are programming bugs, you will again be confused as to what is happening. And finally, design consideration. Now, why challenge? Why design consideration is a challenge? It is because, this is from a developer point of view, by the way, when you're designing a web application, so you need to design it in such a way whereby the programs do not get too much entangled. Sometimes you may have 2 or 3 different scripts. One script would be for AJAX, for example. The second script is for your website banner. Let's say if you have rotating banner images on a website, another script will be coming in. If you have an image gallery, you may use another script. So if your design and your coding layout is not appropriately set, so these scripts may entangle with one another and cause certain errors. And this is where developers find it a bit more challenging using AJAX. Traditional versus AJAX web applications. So we'll look at traditional web applications. Now, traditional web applications, we have talked about it from slide number 1. Traditional is whereby you have a static website. Now, in a static website, what happens is basically, in that case, you are just viewing information from a web page. You're reading it. So we have fijivillage.com. Moreover, if you have a certain website that does not allow you to manipulate anything on the screen, so that is also a static website. Okay. Now, in a static website, what happens is that you have a client, you have a server, and let's say you have a website. So in it, your client basically requests for the information and the server responds. And what happens, it goes and refreshes the entire web page in a traditional web application. Let's say again, you have a client which requests for information and then the server will respond. So it will refresh the entire page once again. So the client requests, server responds, and the entire page gets refreshed, and then you'll be able to see new set of information in it. Let's say you have another request coming in. So the client requests and the server responds. So the entire web page would get refreshed, and then you'll see the new set of changes that are coming in. Now, this is an example of a traditional client-server architecture. Now, if you're wondering how the client-server architecture actually works, is this: the client requests for the information. So the requesting portion is the user. This is why this particular component here is called a client. It's called a client. So because a user would be using a client, and let's say the user types in www.google.com. So that's the request. So using that requests, it's sent to the server. So the server will go and search for google.com. So from there, it will respond displaying Google's web page on the client. So in that case, it will try to refresh the entire web page. Now, why entire web page and not certain portion of the web page? Because this is a traditional web application. Okay. Now, with the traditional web application, there's a full page refresh, like mentioned. Okay, it refreshes the entire page every now and then. Moreover, it is very simple to implement. Why simple to implement? Plain programming languages in there. For example, if I would have to go and design fijivillage.com's website, it's simple, very simple, not complicated at all. HTML, CSS, get the entire front end done, and in the back end you have MySQL and PHP to ensure that all the data is fed in from the database onto the front-end web page. That's pretty simple. And then with a traditional web application, retransmit data again and again to cater for requests and response. Okay, so retransmit data. So the retransmission of data is request and respond, request and respond, request and respond. So every time when there's a request, it gets processed, refreshes, and then responds. Okay, reloads complete web page. So the entire web page is completely refreshed. Now, when you are trying to refresh the entire web page, and let's say your web page has a lot of images in them, let's say it has videos, it has some image galleries, it has some banner scripts and so forth, what it might do is it might slow down your network. Eventually, the user might feel that the entire website is quite slow. And in the slow network, it basically slows the entire process. So now we do know this, that your web browsers have a cache memory system. So in the cache memory system, once an image gets loaded on a website, it does not need to load again. But what if the image changes every now and then? For example, in fijivillage.com, you'll notice that the news changes every now and then. So does the images, so does the advertisements, and so forth. So in that case, it will delay the loading of the entire website. Now let's go and have a look at an AJAX web application. Now with an AJAX web application, we've talked about this. This is a dynamic website whereby it allows you to manipulate things on the screen. Now in this case, what happens is that the client requests and the server responds. So what you'll notice is that only certain part of the web page is refreshed, thus the web page on that part is updated. Let's say there's another request and the client would request and the server would respond, and only another certain sector of that website is refreshed. Now remember, traditional, the entire web page is refreshed. In this case, only certain portion of the web page. Again, the client would request and the server responds, and then you have another different set of portion being refreshed in that particular website. So that's the major difference between the two. Okay, with traditional, the entire web page is refreshed. In AJAX web application, just that particular portion. In traditional, you have to refresh the entire page again and again and again. Whereas in AJAX web applications, only that portion or small portion, in this case, these three portions, they are being refreshed, and it does not slow the entire process or network. Okay, now the explanation, only partial page refresh. That portion that needs to be refreshed, only that is refreshed in AJAX web applications. User action triggers change behind the scene communication. So what kind of action would trigger? Now for a chat message, as soon as somebody would send an enter or press enter or probably send button on the chat message, there's a likely chance that a refresh script is automatically assigned to it. Okay, or connected to it. So let's say if I would say, hi, how are you? Press onto the send button. So when I'm pressing the send button, it does an automatic refresh to that particular portion of the website, and the other person gets the message straight away. Pretty simple, right? Now, server and database only fetch the required data to update the page. The required data or the certain set of the website is only updated. Now, this process occurs asynchronously. Now, if you would try to go and see the meaning of asynchronously, it says the meaning is not occurring at the same time. The meaning of asynchronous is that something which is not reacting or occurring at the same time. Now, what does that mean? Now, we normally say that as soon as somebody sends a message, you get the information straight away. So what does asynchronous means? Now, asynchronous is this. Now, data transmission on networks occurs in only two ways: synchronous and asynchronous. When you talk about synchronous, that means data travels back and forth at the same time. When somebody sends the data and somebody receives the data, the transmission occurs at the same time. That's synchronous. Asynchronous is whereby data basically gets transmitted in one direction only, either sending or receiving. So in this case, what happens is when somebody is sending in the message to you, so you will be just receiving it. You won't be able to send it at the same time. So that builds up the sequence in your chat feature. Same thing with the comment. What if somebody is sending in a comment or writing comments. Let's say few individuals are writing comments, person A, B, and C. So person A, B, and C, let's say all three of them post a comment at the same time, same second. So would that mean that the comment feature will have three comments, one next to each other? No, it won't. What it'll do is it will build a sequence. So the coding will build a sequence and say, okay, let's all three has come at the same time. Let's assign person A as first comment, person B as second comment, person C as third comment. So a sequence is built. Okay, so the process occurs asynchronously. Now, only relevant portion of the page is refreshed in the browser. Same thing as the first one, okay? Only the certain sect means a section of the web page is refreshed, not the entire browser. So in this case, repeatedly, you do not have to go and refresh the page again and again and again and again, just like in a traditional web page, all right? Now, notice this. Let's again come back to our example, FijiVillage.com and Facebook. So with Facebook, when somebody is sending you a message, so the chat feature gets updated every now and then without you even clicking on a refresh button and so forth. With FijiVillage.com, let's say you're viewing a web page, it's open for a few hours. Does it get updated itself? No, you'll have to go and refresh the web page. So this is the major difference. Try to stick to this example. You'll do well in terms of understanding it. Now, AJAX implementation. Now, this is the complicated part. Why? Because the implementation part basically needs to have a good sense of understandability. Now, JavaScript and jQuery is used to invoke communication with the server. Okay, so you either use AJAX with JavaScript or AJAX with jQuery, and then it invokes communication with PHP, and then PHP with the server. Now, it uses XML HTTP requests. Now, XML HTTP requests, what it basically does is that allows the requesting of data from a web server. Remember, client-server architecture, requests and receive. So XML HTTP request does that for you. Server-side programs generate response in XML. So the servers generally, they give the data in a tabular format, XML. Now, when you look at tabular format, the databases generally they are in a tabular format, or in other words, relational model. Okay. Alternate formats may also be used to generate server response. Example, you have text, HTML tags, and JSON. Okay. So if we say, first of all, the server-side program generate response in XML. So for example, you have over here, you have PHP, you have Servlet, and so forth. Okay, so in that, what you are able to do is you get responses in XML. Apart from XML, you have other formats whereby the server does some form of responding, and it may be in terms of text, it may be in terms of HTML tags and JSON. JSON is JavaScript object notation, by the way. Content of received response is handled using JavaScript with document object model. Okay, so the content is handled using JavaScript, and then the appropriate action takes place, which is incorporated with AJAX. Now, exercise. Okay, so basically that sums up with AJAX. Now, what I would suggest for you to know very, very simply in AJAX is know the acronym of AJAX. Remember, this is an introduction. I just want you to know the very basics of it. Okay, know what does the acronym AJAX stands for. You should know this. Once you have finished probably the entire degree program, if somebody asks you, okay, what does the acronym AJAX stands for, you should be at least able to answer that AJAX is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Okay, now do know that one of the key advantages of using AJAX is that it transforms traditional web applications into responsive web pages. Okay, so moreover, AJAX can be used to automate tasks. Common example is the refreshing. Moreover, it allows you to pull data from the databases and display it on your web pages. We have looked at an example, an exercise, Facebook chat feature, okay, and how AJAX makes it way more easy for Facebook and makes it much more intuitive. How AJAX works, okay? So basically it pulls up data from the databases and displays on the web pages, and it's done by automatic refreshing of that particular set of the web page. Moreover, we do know that there are two types of AJAX, AJAX with JavaScript and AJAX with jQuery. Challenges, you have programming complexity, okay? There are different set of components. Generally, there are 4 components that makes it way more complex. First of all, you need to write down a JavaScript or a jQuery, and from there, you'll create a AJAX object. Thereafter, you'll write down a function or expression in either JavaScript or jQuery, and then you'll write another set of code to handle data. Moreover, there's network concerns. Why network concerns? Because the automatic refreshing of pages or the set of pages may be hefty on the network as well. User experience, novice user will find using AJAX a bit more difficult, whereas experienced users, they wouldn't even feel it. Okay. Now, design concentration, when you're designing your web page with the incorporation of AJAX, you need to be very, very careful and try to ensure that your scripts aren't entangled with one another. If they are, there's a likely chance it may either slow down the web page, or 2, it may give you bugging errors. So we also looked at traditional web applications, okay? So with traditional web applications, we looked at this, the server client requests from the server and the server responds, and the entire web page is being refreshed. Again, if there would be another client which will try to request information, the server will respond and refresh the entire web page. And finally, let's say you have another request coming in, the client would send in the request to the server will respond, and you'll notice that the entire web page will get refreshed. With a AJAX web application, when a client will request for the information and the server respond, only a sect or a portion of the web page is updated. Likewise, if there's another request, another update, another sect of the web page is updated. And again, finally, if you have another request and respond, another portion of the web page could be refreshed. Now, sometimes not necessarily you'll have different portions of the web page being refreshed. It can be the same thing again and again. Okay, example, when you're using the chat feature, or sometimes the comments and so forth. Now, implementation, okay, so when we're implementing AJAX, generally you are trying to invoke some form of communication with the server, and generally that is done with JavaScript and jQuery programming languages. Okay, the server-side programs, generally they are respond in terms of XML. Now, why XML? Because we're dealing with databases. So databases are generally in tabular or relational format. Moreover, with XML, you have other formats that are generated by the server. This may be in terms of text, HTML tags, JSON, etc. So that sums up your introduction to AJAX. Pretty simple, not so difficult. Now, the next exercise is that refer to the lecture-based quiz for AJAX lecture. So this is the lecture. There's a quiz that will be set straight after the recording. Okay, so you are supposed to attempt that. Now, it is an online quiz. Now, do note this does not contribute any marks towards your coursework. Okay, therefore, what it does, it just tests your knowledge as per the lecture notes which has been discussed, nothing apart from what is discussed in the lecture note. Moreover, there's no time limitation, there's no date limitation provided. Okay, just try to test yourselves out. Now, next session, which is tomorrow. In tomorrow's class, okay, we'll have, okay, let's read point number 1. This small lecture sums up on introduction on AJAX, so basic introduction. Now, in the next 2 classes that we'll have for this week, okay, those 2 classes will be dedicated for your revision questions. Okay, so I will provide you with a set of revision questions in tomorrow's class and also on Friday's class. Let's see how the electricity and the network is, because when electricity is down, the network is also down. Do note that. But if that is a current situation, so what I'll do is I'll record the lecture as I'm doing right now. If not, then I will advise you accordingly when the class is going to be. Try to keep your timings as flexible as possible. If you are a working student, if dedicating time somewhere in the morning is difficult for you, I can always conduct the lecture somewhere 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. in the morning. No, I'm kidding. Somewhere around 6 to 8 p.m. should be fine with me. If not, I think most of you would prefer if I would just record and give you the questions straight away. Okay. For any further questions or queries, please do feel free to drop me an email on munil.gounder@fnu.ac.fj, or you're also hooked up with me. I think Miss Narayan has also added me on the Viber group, and you're hooked up with me. You're most welcome to drop me a message on it. Okay. So that's all for today, everyone. I greatly thank you for your time and effort in terms of watching this recording, and I hope you've learned at least something in today's class. Okay. Yeah, any question, queries, feel free to drop me an email. Okay, I would respond within 24 hours time frame, provided if I have battery on my devices. But I'm hoping things should normalize from tomorrow onwards. Till then, take care, stay safe, everyone. See you in tomorrow's lecture recording or in tomorrow's class. Goodbye.